Hello everyone, this is Dr. Christine Austin, and I will be reviewing a presentation on financial aid for the Legal Issues for Professionals in CSP course. So like many things in higher education, financial aid awards take their guidance from principles of contract law. This financial aid, once it's awarded, is a contract between the institution and the recipient. The institution is obliged to provide that aid and at certain times and in certain amounts to pay for tuition and lodging, accommodation, food, that kind of thing. And the aid recipient is obligated to repay for loans or to spend those funds, if they're other than loans, for whatever the specified academic expense is. Students also have used contract law to challenge withdrawal or reduction in amounts of scholarships. So there are a number of court cases that pertain to this. When an institution decided that it would reduce the amount of a scholarship, in Aronson versus the University of Mississippi, that student challenged that withdrawal and went to court and was able to win because it was a contract that had been signed initially between the student and institution. Laws governing gifts, grants, wills, trusts also apply to financial aid. So if there are particular laws that deal with how you give money from a will or a trust, institutions have to follow that legal guidance as well. Funds provided by governmental agencies also have conditions in their regulations for how that money is to be awarded, and all of those precedents and legal documents have to be followed. Constitutional due process is another area of legal principle, and it generally applies to state institutions. It can apply to private institutions when those institutions make awards from public funds. So if a private institution is using money from the Pell Grant or something like that, they must abide by any regulation that that particular fund is governed by. Federal and state laws are another area where financial aid is governed by a legal principle. And these are in the areas particularly of lending and extensions of credit. So when we're talking about student loans in particular. So there are a couple of acts that govern how you work with student loan programs. And you can see those here as well. The federal government provides a good deal of money. Hopefully that will continue. But it provides millions of dollars to student financial aid for post-secondary education. And this is a big investment by the federal government. So there are a number of requirements and regulations that govern how institutions manage and spend these funds. Institutions must make sure that they are not discriminating in who they award the money to, and that they're keeping appropriate records so that they can keep those under the guidelines of FERPA, so that they're not giving information regarding how much money a student has taken out to just anyone. So there are some guidelines that they must follow there. And also they need to look at the eligibility for institutions and students wishing to participate in federal aid programs. And those are governed by a number of congressional federal records. Institutions have eligibility criteria as well, and they must meet those criteria. Most often, the first big one that they have to meet is that they are accredited by a regional accrediting agency. Arkansas Tech, as an example, is accredited by the Higher Learning Commission of the North Central Association. So when you hear things like HLC or Higher Learning Commission, that is the accrediting body that looks at the quality of the programs at Arkansas Tech and rates them as appropriate for granting higher education degrees. So institutions also must meet or provide at least an associate's degree of achievement to meet other requirements. Proprietary institutions, or those that are for-profit, can participate if they provide at least 15 weeks of instruction. And institutions need to enter into a written program participation agreement with the Secretary of Education. So there are a number of guidelines that institutions must follow. program participation, institutions must agree to several Higher Education Act provisions, including Title IV and all the regulations promulgated under the Higher Education Act. They must certify that they don't charge students a fee for processing applications, and that they maintain those records in a manner that is secure and that is reported regularly to the state and federal agencies. They also need to make sure that the institution is complying with laws regarding disclosure of information, and they have to make sure that they are adhering to the Student Right to Know and Campus Security Act as well. Students who have received federal aid and have been convicted of drug offenses are excluded from eligibility for federal student aid. So this is something that students definitely need to be very much aware of, that if they are convicted of drug offenses, they're not going to be eligible for financial aid for 1 year after that conviction, or 2 years for those who've been convicted twice. 3 times and basically you're out. The Higher Education Act of 1965 is where most federal student aid programs were created. That act has been regularly reauthorized since 1965, and I believe is up for reauthorization right now, but the Congress has not been able to agree on the provisions currently, so hopefully that will happen soon. But they do govern various programs, and that's how funds are made available from the government for higher education purposes. The Higher Ed Act gives different types of funds to institutions, such as the Perkins loans. They have these federal supplemental educational opportunity grants, and the new GI Bill and Pell Grants are also funds that are governed by the Higher Ed Act, as well as one of the big ones, the Federal Stafford Loan Program. And this one is one where students and parents may both take out extra loans to assist a student going through higher education. The Higher Ed Act has some requirements made on students as well, and at this point, students, male ones for now, are required to register with Selective Service in case there should be a draft in the future. There are policies of non-discrimination that apply to the financial aid process, making sure that students are not discriminated against when they apply for that kind of aid. And numerous acts and legislation governs that kind of process, including affirmative action and equal protection. The act or the federal statute that most impacts financial aid is Title IX, and this regulation prohibits the use of sex-restricted scholarships and any other kind of sex-based distinction in financial aid programs, but there are some exceptions. One is Section 106.37b that permits an institution to administer or assist in the administration of sex-restricted financial aid from domestic or foreign wills, trusts, bequests, and that kind of thing. So if someone makes a codicil to their will and said that they will only fund programs for female volleyball players, they are allowed to do so. Section 106.31c creates the same kind of exception for sex-restricted foreign study scholarships, and then there are distinctions for athletic scholarships and then winners of pageants based on personal appearance, poise, and talent. So those kinds of things are allowed to have particular exceptions to the non-discrimination portion of Title IX.